Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. Today I want to talk to you about an accident that occurred back in February, but it has been blowing up online recently within the last few days. And the person who released the video claims that Full Self-Driving was at fault for pulling the car off to the left of the road. I'm going to play the video here in just a second, but I'm also going to use the data that the person who posted the accident also kindly provided from Tesla. We're going to analyze it, and then perhaps most importantly, I want to talk about what sort of consequences this might have for Tesla's robotaxi release, because it is June 1st right now, and that is the month that supposedly robotaxis will be available in Model Ys, where you will be able to go and get in a cab and it will drive you from point A to point B in Austin. So I want to talk about that at the end, but first I want to break down this actual accident itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is play the video. Of course, this is the Tesla front camera. We're going to get into the issues with the fact that the front camera only is available and there's not a lot of other data. I think there's a reason for this. Anyway, as you can see, this is a winter scene. This was February 27th. Given the timing and everything, the UTC timing and everything, Tesla says they don't have access to the place that this took place, only the time. I'm going to explain that in just a second. But anyway, from the shadows and from the fact that there are no leaves on the trees and stuff, I would say we're probably looking at East Coast, right? You know, someplace North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, something like that. And there is the accident. So there you go. I was talking over the top of it. Let me go back to this and show you this particular part. So right as this truck passes, the car veers off the road and strikes that pine tree and flips upside down. The person very heartbroken because he had only had this Tesla, I think, for 746 miles. So a brand new Tesla, brand new at driving this. And obviously the author is very unhappy. Thank goodness he is okay. It was only minor injuries. And the post for this was 4 days ago, as you can see here on our Tesla FSD. You can see here, and I'm going to reproduce this in just a second because I actually have screen grabs. They're not the most high resolution screen grabs, so I did a little bit of sharpening in Photoshop to make sure they worked. But anyway, you can see here that he reports this and reports he was driving version 13.2.8 of the Tesla full self-driving software. So let's go ahead and look at this report, and you can see I sharpened it up because it was fairly low resolution. So anyway, it looks a little chunky, but that's because I sharpened it up. That's me. That's not the original post. Anyway, you can see it happened at 8:40 UTC, which means it would have been about 3:40 in the afternoon on East Coast time if it was indeed East Coast, which is why I think it was East Coast, because you can see very, very long shadows at that time of day. You can see way down here at the bottom that approximate location is not available. Camera recordings are not available. Event data recorder is available, which is where we got this information. The reason why I think this happened, a lot of people have been claiming that Tesla is hiding things, but let us take a look at this. This happened on February 27th. The request, or for the file, was generated. Maybe the request was made months ago. I don't know. But the file was generated on May 24th. So I'm assuming that the request only went out, maybe a day or two before that. So what you're looking at is approximately 3 months, 90-ish days between the date of the accident and the request for the generated information. My assumption here is that Tesla, they've got tons of information coming in. They probably keep the bulk of the accident information for a short period of time and then discard it. So that would be my assumption as to why they do not have even a location for this accident. They only have the real basic data that they need. So my thinking is, and if an accident ever happens to you, my suggestion to you, and hopefully it doesn't, is that you request from Tesla as soon as possible, as soon as you are able, request the information, because I'm thinking that if the person had done this within, let's say, 4 or 5 days of the accident, that there would have been more information available. But anyway, this is what's available. You can see that what it does is it records approximately 5 seconds in front and behind the collision. This is the speed here. So it was going very, very steady speed. And then as it veered off to the left of the road, the speed started to decline. Then as it hit the ditch, obviously declined a great deal. Struck the tree, I believe, is the first blue one, and then flipped over and then came to a complete stop. So it went from 45 miles an hour down to basically 0 miles per hour, as you would expect from watching that accident. Next up, let's look up here where it says at -5 seconds before the accident, Autopilot was active. At -1 seconds, it was unavailable, and at 0 seconds, it was unavailable. So that unavailable might sound bad, but as Green the Only said, results of my current testing show that when you disengage with the steering wheel, it also changes the state from from active FSD to unavailable. If you don't know, Green the Only digs around inside Tesla's source code inside their software and can see a lot of stuff that us normal human beings can't see. But I'm sure if you've driven full self-driving yourself, you know this. If you tap the brakes or you turn the steering wheel or something, the little steering wheel icon that indicates that FSD is available goes away for 4 or 5 seconds, something like that. Maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit shorter, but it disappears for several seconds after you do that. I assume it has to go through some sort of reset mode or something like that, right? So it's resetting itself, it's re-understanding where it is in the world, and it's just unavailable for a few seconds, and then you can re-engage it. So unavailable is not Tesla trying to cheat here, it's just the literal state of full self-driving that happens after there is a manual disengagement. So that's the part that's really important, because Sin Nightmare posted that he was in full self-driving, did not touch the steering wheel. This is an indication that the steering wheel was torqued out of position. We're going to look at more information about that in just a second, but that is an initial indication, because it said it was unavailable, that there was no fault with the full self-driving, but that it was manually disengaged. And just to follow up another reply from Green the Only, I guess I'll amend this here for more visibility, that in my current testing on my car, when I disengage with steering, in other words, with the steering wheel, autopilot state goes from active full self-driving straight into unavailable. So it goes directly from full self-driving mode, active, to unavailable. That's the immediate effect of that. And very briefly, the autopilot driver monitoring detection system, in other words, seeing if the person was paying attention, is detected in all of those, so that is good. And then the cruise control state goes from enabled to standby, and that Green the Only also talked about that autopilot and cruise control are slightly different. They're highly related to each other, but standby mode is basically the same thing as unavailable. So those two things happen in sequence with each other. Then you notice that brake manual application was not applied until after the accident. We will see that in just a minute. And that the seatbelt buckle status was latched during the accident, thank goodness, because obviously that kept Sin Nightmare from having a worse injury. So anyway, I'm very, very glad he's okay. And we're analyzing this to try to get to the facts as much as possible. This is all going to be speculation, obviously. But as we look at the data already, we can see that going from active to unavailable and enabled to standby indicates that there was a manual disengagement of what happened here. Now, this will count as a full self-driving accident, because Tesla says they're conservative about it. If full self-driving is disengaged less than 5 seconds prior to an accident, that counts as a full self-driving accident. So no question this counts as a full self-driving accident, because 5 seconds prior to the accident, full self-driving was active. Of course, also very critically from an insurance and a legal standpoint, the driver is always responsible for what happens in their Tesla. This is considered a driver, an ADAS. It's an advanced driver assistance system. It's not a replacement. The person driving the car is still responsible. So no question that the person driving the car is responsible for the accident no matter what, right? Even if full self-driving did drive him off the road, he's still responsible for the accident. So there's no question about that part either. I have no idea what the resolution of the accident, all of that kind of stuff with the insurance company was like. I'm sure it kind of sucked, but anyway, hopefully he was made whole and everything was okay, and he was able to purchase another Tesla or vehicle of his choice, whatever. Anyway, so I don't know about that, but I do know that legally and from an insurance standpoint, the person was responsible for this accident. All right, so then we get into the deeper pages of this, and this is really nice because these things are all lined up with each other. The dotted gray line here indicates the point at which Tesla senses that the accident happened. So that's the dividing line. Now, things happen before that we're going to see, but this we'll just go through really fast. You can see that the accelerator pedal was not pressed because the person was in full self-driving until the accident happened, at which point their foot probably flopped all over the place. They also applied pressure to the brake pedal, but after the accident was happening, so again, it didn't really have any effect on things. And the brake master cylinder was operating properly. There was no pressure differential, and you can again see the speed decreasing, so that's a repetition of that. Then we get the same thing where you can see the status of autopilot. So the autopilot state right here at 20, 40, 29 disengages, it goes from, it's a 1 to 0, right? It's either engaged or it's not. There's no fading off or something. At that point, it disengaged, and then the accident happened here. You can see that the driver monitoring system was working perfectly all the time, and cruise control state was in active, and then it went to standby, and then it went to fault. And of course, that's what happened here. This also went to fault at the point at which the accident happened. It's not going to be able to re-engage anymore because it is something bad has happened to the car. So it went from, active, and active here or enabled here to unavailable and standby here to fault for both of them at the same time when that happened. And the driver monitoring system was available the entire time. And again, you can see the speed reduction happening here. And then finally, we get to the last and most interesting page. This is the steering angle. In other words, the actual angle of the steering wheel, where down is actually counterclockwise. So that would be steering to the left, and up is actually clockwise. And then you have the steering wheel torque. And then of course we also have the speed as we have had before. But let's take a look at both of these things. This is a little confusing because down is actually left. And so I'm going to do some overlays here in just a minute, but just remember that down is actually left, which indicates that the person would be turning left. So you can see from this that approximately 1.5 seconds prior to the official accident beginning, there was a turn to the left, then a violent turn back to the right again, and then back to the left, and then crazy right. As soon as he hit the ditch, I'm sure the steering wheel was just going all over the place. And you can see that with the torque being applied all over the place. At that point, Sin Nightmare, if he was just holding on to the steering wheel, the wheels are going to be flipping all over the place. So you're going to be getting very, very violent torques that are going on here. But what's really interesting is if we look at this, right as the vehicle begins to turn left here, right? It's going straight, then begins to turn left. Just before this is the really interesting part right here. And what this indicates is that there was basically zero torque happening on the wheel at all. In other words, there was nothing attempting to move it back and forth except for maybe just minor adjustments with the road. But just prior to when the vehicle starts to turn left, there was an initial tug to the left. Then there was a tug back to the right, in other words, clockwise, in other words, trying to make the car go straight again, then a violent tug to the left, and then things start going crazy. And this is the exact point at which full self-driving disengaged itself. So in order to see that better, I'm going to show you this. Yeah, it's a little ugly in terms of the text, but what I've done is I've aligned all of these things. So the green is the actual steering wheel angle, the purple is the torque that's on it, the gray is the speed, so you can see the speed goes down, and then the blue is the autopilot state. So you can see, and I've aligned all these things so that they begin at exactly the same time, and some of them end a little bit earlier than others, but as close as possible, right? And of course, the gray dashed line is on top of each other. So all of these things I think are pretty well lined up here. But what you can see is that just prior to autopilot disengaging, and remember, going into unavailable mode is an indication that a manual intervention happened. I think there may be other states at which that could happen, but generally there would be some sort of fault state or something like that. If it was internal to autopilot, this indicates that there was a manual intervention. And of course, the critical part right here is just before this in the box. So just before it disengages, you can see speed is pretty much consistent, torque is consistent, direction is consistent. There's this initial tug to the left, in other words, counterclockwise on the steering wheel. Then probably what my guess is what happens here is that autopilot attempts to correct the steering wheel angle. So there's an initial tug to the left, autopilot tries to steer it back to the right, and then there's a violent tug to the left. And that is the point right here at which it disengages. And again, I might be off just by a little bit. It's possible that this blue line should be lining up more aligned in here. But anyway, at this point in this sequence here is when autopilot disengages, probably right when this violent torque to the left happened. There is an initial torque back to the right, so it's possible that autopilot attempted to make a correction, but at that point it was disengaged, or the person, if they had disengaged it, also then turned it back to the right, but then turned it back to the left and then turned it back to the right. So at that point, things were going crazy, right? So that part is just pretty much chaos, and you can see that it's all chaos here as the car turns. And you can also see the speed as the car really starts to go to the left. It starts to descend just a little bit, and then probably around here is when it hits the ditch and it begins to slow down. And then of course it slows down very, very quickly as it strikes the tree and rolls over. So again, the critical part is right here as something happens. There is violent torque on the steering wheel. Is it possible that full self-driving torqued itself like that and then corrected? Yeah, it's certainly possible. It could have gotten into some weird state or something like that. Have I ever experienced anything like that? No. Have other people? Yeah, there is a possibility. Again, I don't know for sure without more data, but this indicates fairly strongly, especially given that full self-driving went into unavailable state, that there was some sort of manual intervention, or that the steering wheel was torqued in such a way that full full self-driving thought that there was a manual intervention. Those are really the two possibilities. Either there was a manual one or full self-driving did it itself and thought there was a manual one. If that's the case, that is really, really bad news. But the likelihood here is that there was a manual intervention. And I want to talk just a second about flashbulb memories, because Sin Nightmare says, absolutely, I didn't touch the steering wheel. Everything was fine. But let's take a look right here. If we go back to the other page, you can see that autopilot, driver monitoring detection was active, right? So detected the whole way. Hands on not required was not activated. Don't know why. Maybe the person had not toggled the switch. Maybe he hadn't driven enough miles, because again, it was only 746 miles on this vehicle. So obviously, Sin Nightmare had not driven full self-driving a great deal at this point. Whatever the root cause for this, the likelihood is that his hands were on the steering wheel, because this was that type of driver monitoring. It wasn't the hands-free driver monitoring where you can just sit there and you can look out the road and the camera detects your face and says, okay, you don't need your hands on the wheel. This is the type of full self-driving that requires your hands on the wheel, and you have to tweak it once in a while. You have to, give it some sort of torque, a small amount of torque, to indicate that you're still alive at that point, right? Or in control of the vehicle. So that indicates that the person's hands were on the wheel at that point, which of course increases the likelihood that this torque right here was some sort of accidental torque. Now, people remember things incorrectly all the time. This is related to flashbulb moment memories, where people remember things very, very definitely, and they think they know what happened, but they actually don't remember things correctly. And it's just a weird part of, our minds. And a lot of it actually has to do with retelling of the story over and over again. So we're talking about, again, a 3-month span between this February accident and now. And in that 3-month span, it's very likely that Sin Nightmare has told the story over and over and over again. And that retelling of the story with flashbulb memories, this is a verified psychological effect, causes you to rewire your brain to remember the event in the way that you remember it, not necessarily the way things happened. This was studied very extensively after 9/11 back in 2001 for like over a decade, and people's stories about the event changed fairly drastically over the decade as they were retelling the story, and they were more and more and more convinced that they remembered it exactly correctly. So this is the exact kind of a situation where I'm not saying that this person is lying. There's a high degree of likelihood, even if he had disengaged the wheel himself, that he might not have realized he did that, because again, he was a relatively new full self-driving driver, and the accident happened immediately after that. So your brain's, you're not thinking about that thing that happened 1 second before the accident. You're thinking about the accident. And number two, after 90 days of remembering this, there's a high degree of likelihood that this person doesn't remember what happened accurately. So the indication from what I'm seeing is that this was human error, not full self-driving error. But let's go back and take a look at an overlay over the video. All right, I'm going to remove myself from the picture here so you can see over here very, very well. What I've done is I put in a time code here and just chopped up the little piece right before the accident. And then what you'll see, I'll play it in real time, is you'll see a little black thing coming up, sort of indicating real time. And you'll see here as the torquing happens down and up, that's when the accident begins. I'll play it in real time first, and then we'll go back and watch. So you can see the black bar coming up, and right here, right there is where the turn to the left, and then the accident happens. All right, so let's go back and watch this. And I forgot to mention previously, but I've flipped these things around. So this actually indicates turning to the left now. I kind of flipped it horizontally so you can see it better, and the torque is actually flipped around as well. So you can see the torque going to the left. So there's a little torque going to the left here, then it goes to the right, then big torque going to the left, which is when we get the disengagement and it actually begins to turn to the left. So just pay attention to that, because I kind of flip things around just to make it make more logical sense. So anyway, we're coming along, we're driving towards the vehicle. You can see the tree that it's going to strike here, and then we're moving along. And right here, we get an initial torque that's going on. And I'm doing my best here. This is an approximation in terms of the timeline. So, right, it may not be down to the millisecond accurate, but this is pretty reasonable. There's a torque here that happens. There is a correction to the torque, and then there is a violent torque. So let's say the person kind of moved the steering wheel a little bit. They weren't paying attention. The autopilot moved the steering wheel back. That caused the person, Sin Nightmare, to then redirect their eyes. Maybe they were looking at the fields or something like that, right? Redirect their eyes to the road. They then see this car coming, and there's an immediate whoop, right? And there's a little jerk or something. And that jerk is the exact moment that the vehicle, as we come here, right about here, as the car is passing is when, right, you can see it redirect, and I'll play through right there, right? So that's what I've kind of lined up, is you can see the green right here and the torquing happening. And right at that moment, zoop, is when it starts to pull off the road. And then, of course, we're into the accident itself. So then you can watch that, and I would say the accident probably officially started as it went in the ditch. That would be the moment at which Tesla, the automobile, detected that that was an accident. But if we go back to this particular moment, is right here, there's a lot of torque that happens, which then causes this deviation from going down the road. And you can see it's very straight up to that point, and then an immediate turn. So torque and turn, torque and turn. All right, so that's my analysis of the accident itself. It was very likely human error. It's also very likely that Sin Nightmare does not remember that. It is quite possible. Again, flashbulb memories are a real thing, and an accident is so violent your brain gets jostled around. Anyway, the odds of remembering the couple of seconds right before the accident with any kind of clarity are almost negligible. So I'm not saying they're lying at all. I'm saying that that memory is probably very firmly fixed, but might not be accurate to the facts. But now let's get back to the question I asked at the beginning of this video, which is, this is June. Tesla is set to release their robotaxis into the wild in an unsupervised manner in Austin, Texas only, but this will hopefully go nationwide and then worldwide. What are the consequences if this accident was in fact caused by full self-driving? I would say the consequences are fairly dire if it was caused by full self-driving, because it was a sunny day, perfectly clear weather, a perfectly straight road. There would have been absolutely no reason for full self-driving to fail under these circumstances. This is about as easy as driving gets. The only complexity, of course, was that a car was passing at that moment. If that was what caused it, if full self-driving actually did fail because a car was going down the other direction of a straight road, that is a dire, dire consequence. That is, that's kind of the showstopper sort of thing for Tesla's full self-driving, if that is indeed the case. Do I think that's the case? No. I think that the very high likelihood is this was human error, that the person had their hand on the steering wheel and inadvertently jerked it to the left a little bit. The autopilot corrected back to the right, and then there was a large jerk to the left, which caused the car to come out of autopilot, at which point it ran into the ditch and hit the tree. And again, I'm very, very thankful that there were not any serious injuries, because it was clearly very bad. I mean, the car flipped completely over. And so I'm very thankful that they were okay and that everything is good. But again, I think the likelihood here, after analyzing this very, very carefully, is that it was human error. And if that's the case, then this is not something that full self-driving will need to deal with, assuming that they will not allow passengers in the driver's seat, because Tesla Model Ys, which are the only vehicles that will be in the first initial rollout of the robotaxis in Austin, those have mechanically connected steering wheels. In other words, if you reach over and you grab it and you turn that wheel, you can take it out of full self-driving. You can actually do that with Cruise and Waymo also. You can override the vehicles, which is why they don't let you sit in the driver's seat of those vehicles as well. Now with the Cybertruck, the wheel is connected electronically, right? It's not actually hardwired. There's no actual hardware linkage between the steering wheel and the wheels. So you could disable that. And of course, the robotaxi will have no steering wheel at all. So there's no opportunity for the person to press the brakes or touch the steering wheel or anything, because none of that stuff exists. But anyway, in the Model Y, my assumption is that they will not allow people in the driver's seat of the vehicle, for the very reason that you could inadvertently or on purpose tweak the steering wheel or press the brakes or do something like that and override the full self-driving. So do I think this is a showstopper for Tesla? No, I don't. Do I think horizontal gates could be? If you haven't seen that video, check that out. I'll leave a link at the end of the video as well. I think that one is a much more dangerous situation. This one I do not think is a showstopper from a technological point of view, but from a public relations point of view, this is the kind of thing that will be devastating to Tesla. This is the thing that generated a bunch of articles, a bunch of bad press, a bunch of people piling on about this without really looking at it carefully and understanding the situation. And of course, even if my video gets 100,000 views or something like that, and I hope it does, that would be great, it's not going to be enough to overcome the millions and millions of views that people have given to the negative story. So people are going to see the negative story and they're going to assume that anything that I post like this, even though I try to be very, very factual as much as I could, is some sort of Tesla apology, not an actual analysis of the accident. And of course, this will eventually happen with robotaxis as well. Even if it's a circumstance where the vehicle is going through a green light and somebody blows through a red light and sideswipes the car or something like that, that is going to make news. That is not the Tesla's fault one whit, right? If somebody blows through a red light, that's their fault, but that's still going to make big press. And people will read the headline, Tesla robotaxi involved in autonomous accident or something like that. And then they'll show pictures of the car being all smashed up, and people probably won't even read the article. They'll just walk away with this impression that these things are very, very unsafe. So while from a technological standpoint, it looks like Tesla's full self-driving is very, very close to being adequate to do this kind of unsupervised driving, from a public relations standpoint, it's a whole different ballgame, especially considering that Tesla has been in a challenging situation from a PR standpoint lately anyway. So this all creates a really, really challenging situation for Tesla to release the robotaxi in June, as Elon Musk has promised us. Will they go ahead and release the robotaxi into the wild this month? Yes, I think they actually will. Will it have a lot of risks associated with it? Given what we see from an accident like this, yes, it has a lot of risks with it. So let me know what you think about all of this in the comments, whether you think my analysis is right or wrong, and whether you think Tesla is going to go ahead and release the robotaxi into the wild in the next 30 days or not. While you're down there, if you don't mind liking the video, it really helps because it allows other people to find it. And if you want to see more of this kind of content, please consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.